You know, there's a man named Jim Braddock, born in June of 1905 to Irish immigrants in New York City. And as he turned 18, he got into boxing and he started boxing, and they called him the one-trick pony because he didn't really have much of a left. They said his jab was terrible and he wouldn't even have made it into boxing at all, but he just had this amazing right hand. And he'd get into a fight and he'd be getting beat up and he couldn't keep the fighter off him, so he'd take a beating, but just every once in a while he'd wind it up and he'd throw it, and if he connected, it was over. And he started winning. And they said through a combination of mental toughness and that roundhouse right hand, he became a contender. But he didn't study, and he didn't, like you said, he didn't have much to have left, so he couldn't keep those fighters off. And in 1929, in this big chance where they thought if he could beat this guy, Tommy Loughran, he could become a true contender for the title. But in 1929, not only was he beaten, but he was pummeled. He was embarrassed. Beaten so bad that he said not only did he take a physical beating, but he took a mental beating. He realized he didn't have what it takes, or at least he believed that. And in 1929, if you recognize that date, that's only 2 months. His fight was only 2 months before the Great Depression. So not only did he lose the fight, but in the Great Depression, he'd lost any of the money he had saved up for his young family. And he said, I had a bad attitude. In the fight, he had busted up his right hand. He said his hand hurt so bad that through a series of events, this fighter that was that had won over 30 fights, he was 36, 6, and 6 at this time. Over the next 4 years, he won just a couple fights and lost 19. Going from a contender to the point where he couldn't even make enough money in his fights to support his family, that he had to take a job down at the local shipyard, working as a common laborer, kicked out of their house. Things were not looking good. No one would even hear of this guy. But in every challenge, in every struggle, if you have a dream, you've got to reach inside of yourself and you've got to pull out the guts. Because as Lori said, no dream, no guts, no glory. And this man, he said, well, if I got to work in the shipyard, I might as well work. And since my right hand's broken and I've got to let it heal, he started working extra hard with his left hand, and he started doing everything with his left hand. And he developed the agility and the strength in his left hand that over the next years, his hand healed up and he went back into the ring. All of a sudden, they noticed when he was boxing, he said, whoa, where'd you get that jab? That where everybody else, this guy goes through 19 losses, everybody thinks he's over, everybody's written him off. Some of them even said he shouldn't even be allowed back into fighting because he'd embarrassed himself so bad. But he started to come back, and he started boxing, and he won his first big contender fight, and he won another one, and then he was one of the top 5, and they're like, you got to be kidding me. This guy already had his run. He's over the hill. He's old now. He had lost 19. He doesn't even have a record. He shouldn't even be a contender. They gave him one more fight, and he won it again. And now he was one of the top 3. And Max Baer, the champion, the world heavyweight, had a choice of a couple guys he was going to fight. And he was afraid of fighting this guy Schmeling. And so they said, you know what, let's fight that Jim Braddock. Yeah, and this is what they said. I got to read this. In fact, Baer and his team thought so little of Braddock that one of them, probably Baer's manager, called Braddock a bum. Do you know people will call you things too? The world will spend so much of its time trying to define who you are through their lens. They'll try to tell you who you are based upon the facts. They look at that and say, all we see is the guy that had 19 losses, once was a contender, but now he's an also-ran, and they will define you through their terms. But the beautiful thing about the power of a dream is you do not have to accept their definition of you or your dream. Here's what Braddock said. Here's what James Braddock said. He said, "I may not be a great fighter, but I ain't a bum," was Braddock's response. However, even if no one in the press or public thought Braddock was a bum, few gave him any hope of victory against the powerful 6'2", 210-pound slugger Max Baer. He was bigger, stronger, had a longer reach, hit harder, was younger, had not been defeated in 4 years, had killed 2 men in the ring. But what Braddock brought was character and a dream. You give everybody else every other advantage, but you give somebody the dream, and I'll take the person with the dream. And when the fight happened, they said for the first 6 rounds, Baer didn't even take it serious. He thought, I'm just boxing. He was showboating, playing for the crowd, throw a couple punches. They said he hardly even trained for this fight because they expected at any moment he could just turn it on and knock him out. And maybe he could have had he took the first 6 rounds serious, but he underestimated the power of the guts, the power of the dream. And Braddock not only survived the first 6 rounds, but when Baer turned it on in the 7th, expecting 1 round to knock him out, he threw all of his best stuff and he hit Braddock hard and he knocked Braddock down. And you know what Braddock did? He got back up. And they said by the 8th round it started, Baer was throwing haymaker after haymaker trying to knock him down, but he was tired now. Because he hadn't trained, he never expected it to go this long. And when Braddock hit him again and again and again and won a unanimous decision, James J. Braddock, as you know, the Cinderella man, was the champion. The champion. And if you watch that story, what you're going to see over and over and over again. So many people live their whole life. They have no dream, they have no guts, and that's why they never have a story that anybody ever hears. Yet the Cinderella man, millions upon millions of people have heard James J. Braddock's story. A poor immigrant kid that was born just a few blocks from the Madison Square Garden, and later became a star, winning his title match right there. Because Braddock had a dream. And because he had a dream, that fueled the guts. And because he had the guts, that courage, that intestinal fortitude, he has a story that we've all heard.